Hello, I am Mr. Beasley, and in this video I'm going to be talking you through the second chapter of Lord of the Flies, called Fire on the Mountain. So, let's begin. Chapter 2 pretty much begins where Chapter 1 ended. The three boys, Ralph, Jack and Simon, have returned from their expedition on the mountain, and Ralph has used the conch to call another meeting. It's afternoon now, and many of the boys, without the supervision of adults, have been burnt by the sun. This is an early example of Ralph's leadership style, and it's a good bit to compare with events that happen later. Remember that Ralph has got no leadership experience, and there is a moment's hesitation before he speaks to the assembled boys. But he soon realises that he's able to talk fluently and explain what he wanted to say. He quickly summarises what the three boys have found during their climb to the top of the mountain, and that's that they're on an uninhabited island, and so they will need to look after themselves until they're rescued. Jack quickly interrupts Ralph in his excitement to tell the boys about seeing the squealing pig, and the temper that he showed at the end of Chapter 1 briefly returns as he slams his knife into the trunk of a tree and repeats his promise of next time. It's worth remembering this public commitment from Jack, along with the shame and humiliation he experienced twice in Chapter 1, as these events will go on to shape the way that his character develops. Despite the interruption, Ralph continues to display qualities of genuine leadership as he begins to establish the rules for a civilised society. And these rules are clearly based on the foundations of democracy. Ralph ensures that everyone has the right to speak and the right to be heard by using the conch to empower the boys. They will hold it when they have something to say and won't be interrupted. The other boys, and especially Jack, get very excited about the creation of rules, although they are vague about what these other rules might be, and they're also vague about what the punishments will be for those who break them. And this is perhaps one of the earliest signs of just how fragile their society will be. The excitement is interrupted by a further dose of realism from Piggy, who is the first of the boys to use the conch to make himself heard. Piggy knows that the most important thing is for the boys to recognise that no one knows where they are, and therefore no one is coming to rescue them. We can tell how urgently Piggy needs to express this point by the fact that he almost gives himself an asthma attack. And this exasperation is caused by the failure of all of the other boys to recognise what is, to Piggy, a completely obvious point. The voices of protest that we hear are unnamed, but the contribution here of "my dad" is easily attributed to Ralph. His innocent optimism is a real feature of the first chapters of the novel, and the degree to which this naive attitude shifts towards Piggy's honest realism is central to understanding how Ralph's character develops. We can see a really early sign of this in the next thing that Ralph says, which has traces of the frustration that he will feel in later chapters. He claims, in this bit that I'm just putting a box round here, that he was going to bring this point up himself all along, but was interrupted by the others. And the repetition of "we may be here a long time," which is here and here as well, stuns the rest of the boys into such silence that he needs to recover the situation with an assurance that this is a good island. To cement this point, and to the boys, and perhaps to give them a reference point that they would all understand, he mentions books that they would all have read: Treasure Island, Coral Island, Swallows and Amazons, all of which contain young male protagonists who find themselves on tropical islands, have a few exciting and character-building scrapes before emerging triumphant at the end. And Golding uses these novels as a starting point for Lord of the Flies. He even uses two of the names, Ralph and Jack, who are the main characters in Coral Island. And the reason for doing this is to make an observation about human nature which really underpins the whole novel. Golding is looking at these novels about boys stranded on desert islands and saying, this is not how boys would behave if they were in that situation. I'm going to write a book about what would really happen. And that is what Lord of the Flies is. I would say that the most important thing which happens in Chapter 2 is here, with a character whom we will call the boy with the mulberry-coloured birthmark. He's described by Golding as a shrimp of a boy, about 6 years old, and one side of his face was blotted out by a mulberry-coloured birthmark. He's being pushed forward by the other boys of a similar age, and when he resists, he is noticed by Ralph and the older boys. The boy with the mulberry-coloured birthmark is clearly nervous, or scared, or both, and when he holds out his hands for the conch, he's ridiculed by the others and starts to cry. It's Piggy who comes to his rescue. Piggy, who will increasingly be associated with the values of fairness and democracy, insists that the younger boy's voice is heard. And Piggy even goes further than this, as the youngster whispers in Piggy's ear, who then interprets for the assembly. So, over the next few paragraphs, the boy with the mulberry-coloured birthmark tells the others that during the night he'd seen a monster, a beast, in the form of a huge snake in the forest. This is initially met with ridicule from the other boys, but as his account continues, and the boy with the mulberry-coloured birthmark continues to insist that it's true, the laughter stops completely and is replaced with serious expressions and exasperation from Ralph. Jack's intervention at this point is important, and it seems to begin helpfully enough. He says, Ralph's right, of course, there isn't a snake thing. However, this is quickly followed by, but if there was a snake, we'd hunt it and kill it. And this effectively keeps the idea of the beastie alive in the minds of the boys. If Jack wants to hunt it and kill it, then there must be something physical for him to hunt and kill. Now, of course, this is all part of Jack's attempt to reassert his personality, as he was denied the job of leading the boys as chief, so he will throw himself into this new role as hunter. It's also a piece of blatant self-promotion. Jack doesn't believe there's a beastie any more than Ralph does, but by saying that he will hunt it and kill it makes him seem brave and heroic in front of the others. The next section introduces the events which give the chapter its title and its dramatic conclusion. It begins with Ralph's simple assertion of, we want to be rescued, and of course we shall be rescued, but it's worth pointing out how effective this is. Firstly, it distracts the boys from thoughts of a giant snake in the forest, and secondly, it shows the weight of Ralph's new authority and his power at the start of the novel to bring light and happiness. Light and happiness are as clearly linked at the start of the book as darkness and fear will be later on. Ralph is liked, respected, and all the boys, even Piggy and Jack, are joining with the smiling and applauding. After they're silent again, Ralph gets to the point he's been building towards, which is a way of helping any potential rescuers to find them by creating a smoke signal, and that means building a fire. As soon as this is mentioned by Ralph, half the boys forget the conch and the ordered democracy that it represents and go charging off up the mountain, following Jack. Ralph is left on the beach, holding the conch with no one left but Piggy, for a moment which briefly foreshadows later chapters. But here, Ralph is able to follow Jack and take part in the enjoyable novelty of fire building. Piggy is cast in the role of an adult who distances himself from the behaviour of the others with the expression acting like a crowd of kids. He will be excluded by the other boys again due to the physical attributes of fat and asthma which prevent him from running and gathering firewood. But while last time, Piggy, this happened when Jack, Ralph and Simon went on an expedition and then he felt humiliation. This time he will become an open target for Jack's bullying behaviour. The fire building itself begins here, and the mood amongst the boys is full of the adventurous, excited spirit which has dominated the opening chapters. Jack, Ralph and the other older boys find a log which is ominously described as a grotesque dead thing, and after this is dumped on the growing pile, Ralph and Jack return for another limb which is almost too heavy for them to carry. The fact that Jack says, "not for the two of us," is Golding showing just what the two boys are capable of achieving when they work together. Notice the affirmation of their friendship in this section. They are happy, contented and enjoying experiencing firsthand the adventure which they'd only previously read about in books. Now, I mentioned the word work just now in relation to the older boys working together. Golding uses the word labouring in this section in relation to the boys building a pile of wood. And what you're going to find in your study of this novel is that behaviour like building a fire, for example, can represent a much wider concept. In this case, the world of work. At the beginning of the novel, here, work is a novelty. It's fun, and the boys throw themselves into the effort gladly and with enthusiasm. What will be interesting for your notes is to see how much their view of this work changes as the novel goes on. But first, we find the boys in the absurd situation of having created a pile of wood without being able to light it. I'll talk in much greater length later about the links between this novel and religious imagery, particularly the Garden of Eden allegory. But for now, it's worth you noting the way that William Golding chooses to express the shame and embarrassment the older boys feel at this oversight. Knowledge and the shame of that knowledge as it develops within Ralph is perhaps the most important idea which Golding is communicating in this novel.